article. So if we scroll down here, we see our handlebars template that's going to be helping us out when we are actually previewing this new article. So we're going to be setting up this preview capability or functionality. So here's our article preview. And now this to-do on line 50 says, set up a form to accept user input for a new blog article. So this is where we're going to begin. Okay. So we're starting on line 51 in new.html. We're going to call our form with an ID equal to new-form. And we're going to be wrapping our inputs with label tags. Gesundheit. What's the importance of wrapping inputs with label tags? We can give those labels titles to let the user know what they should be inputting. What if we have placeholders? So in the example, we saw that the actual input elements were placeholders, and if we gave the label the same title, it would be a little redundant. So for example, on this very first one, we can literally have a blank label here, and we're going to fill in this first input type equal to text. And we're going to give it an ID equal to article title with a placeholder of article title. And then we can finally make note to have that set as a required field. So in this case, if we added a title to our label with the same value that we did for placeholder, it could be redundant. So in this case, we can have a plain label that is wrapped around our input type. Has anyone read up on accessibility with browsers? And who's heard of screen readers for the visually impaired? So labels are very, very important with that. If you want to research more into accessibility, ARIA is a really good resource. That's ARIA. There's a really, really good developer. She was at Substantial. Her name is Marcy Sutton. She gives really, really good talks about accessibility for front end web. She's moved on. I forget where she's at now, but really, really good talks on that role for accessibility. So with this label now, we are allowing screen readers to pick up on exactly what the user may be filling out, which is really important. So there's our first input type. Let's move on to our text area box. Giving it an ID of article-body. And now what we're doing here with the rows and columns is we're essentially just establishing a height and a width. So our rows is going to define the height, and the columns will define that width. And that's going to populate, that's going to be what we fill in our body with. The next one is going to be our article author input. With an author name placeholder. Have that required as well. Next will be our article author URL. Our next input will be the article category. And our last input is going to be a type of checkbox that we can click when we are ready to say that our new article is published. Then we can close out the form. Did you have a question, David?
Yeah, you don't put something to at the end of input to close input. That doesn't need to be closed.
So all inputs are we call them self-closing tags. That's a good question.
You can just dangle something off the end of it.
Yep, yeah, because we're just like, yeah, it's just HTML, so it's going to be like, all right, next thing. Anyone need more time on this part? Let's move on to article.js. There's been a little extra functionality here in that we're checking our this.daysago property, and if it's less than 1, then we want to update the publish status to today. Otherwise, we can actually give it a number here. Now, before we get too far ahead, this to-do says parse any markdown with marked. So we're introducing 2 new libraries today, one that's going to help us pick up on markdown, and there's another one that's going to actually be able to highlight code blocks. And that's going to be utilized with the library highlight.js. So here's marked. And when you install it, you can literally call marked, you can invoke marked, and pass in strings with actual markdown. So these underscores are actually going to evaluate with strong tags in our markdown. So the reason we're using marked today is that when we are writing our article body in the form, we want to be able to pick up on that with marked. So that way when we process our new article and we render that with the JSON, it's going to have the HTML already built out for us. So then we can just actually plop that right into our new data set or our existing data set. So to be able to do this, we can redefine what this.body looks like. So we've already added the library. So we have access to marked. So we're literally just passing this.body into the invocation of marked, which will then pick up on any markdown. So if we write just plain text, what do you think this marked would translate just a single sentence into for HTML? That's right, a p tag. If we just write plain text, we'll get a p tag back. So this is all we're adding here for our article.js. So any questions before we move on to article view? Let's actually showcase this. Can someone help me find index? Am I close? Yeah, you're on. Okay. All right. So let's take a look at index for a moment. Yeah, here's marked, and then we also see highlight. And actually, we have it too here on our new. So we're good to go there. Okay, so we're done with article.js. So let's go into article view. And this is where we're going to do the actual heavy lifting. So let's scroll up here. Here's all our methods that are pre-existing. Handle main nav, set teasers. And here we see the init new article page method that's also on the article view object. And the to-do says, the new articles we create need transferring into our source data file. Set up this export functionality. We can hide it for now and show it once we have data to export. So what we're actually touching on, if we go into new, if we look down below the form here, we can actually see this new section called article export. And we see a label for it, and here's a new input type. So this is where we're actually going to be populating or rendering our JSON underneath our preview. So then we can literally just grab the JSON after we're finished writing our article, and we can paste that directly into our articles data set in a very convenient manner. So we don't have to do any processing. It's going to do that all for us. So back in articleview.js, within this first to do, we can start to complete this And we're going to target the export field that we just looked at. And we're going to hide it for now. And now we're going to set up an event listener for the JSON element. So we're going to pick up with the on method, and the event we're going to listen for is focus. What are the different ways we can focus on an element that we touched on earlier? What are two ways we can receive focus? An element can receive focus. What's one way an element can receive focus? Tab. What's the other one?
Click on it.
Click. We can click and we can tab to an element. So again, going back to usability and accessibility for visually impaired, tabs are crucial, and focus will allow us to pick up on that as well. So here within this, we're saying as soon as we receive focus, we are going to select it. And what will the select method do? Select it? Exactly right. And what will we visually see as the result of that on the page when we select that that JSON line? So like if we click on it or if we tab to it, what's going to happen? Because focus is one thing, but selecting is another. Yeah, what are we doing with the cursor essentially? Go there, and then we're gonna highlight it, right? Essentially, it's going to be highlighted, like as if you had clicked and dragged over that text, right? So we're going to select that. The next to-do says add an event handler to update the preview and export field if any inputs change. So with that, we will target our form. And what? Thank you. Normally after our event, we would just pass in a function, an anonymous function. If we look down below, we see a method called create on article view. And what this is going to do is it's actually going to build out the new article for us. So instead of just passing in an anonymous function, and since we already have a method on article view that's going to do that for us in articleview.create, we can invoke articleview.create right here, all in one line, like that. Yeah, we're just defining we're just invoking the function in this case. So no quotes are needed here. Any questions before we step into the create method? I'm going to scroll up. So now in articleview.create, the first to do says that we need to clear out the preview to be replaced by the updated preview. So as we're filling the article out, we want to be able to update this. So we're going to grab our article preview. We're going to empty it, and then we're going to fade it in. And then inside of here, we're essentially passing in an object literal to our article constructor to instantiate a new article based on what's inside the form fields. So we've been passing in objects that were already built out. But now that as a blog administrator, where we're actually writing out our blog, we want to be able to generate one on the fly. So we're going to pick up on all of those input and text area fields in that form to be able to build out a new article based on this constructor. So the first one that we will build out is the title. We're going to use the val getter to pick up on this. Keep in mind we are inside an object literal right now, so we're setting properties on this new object. Therefore, after each property, we're going to add a comma. So after title, we can get the body. Get its value. Get our article author. Get its value. We'll get our URL. We'll grab the category. We're going to grab published on finally here. Yeah. Does anyone remember what this operator is called? We're trying to pick up on a value for published on, so we're first asking to see if our jQuery selector returns any set of matched elements. So with this pseudo checked selector inside of our jQuery selector, we're seeing if that article published, which is our checkbox, right? If that's selected, it's going to actually return a value back to us. Therefore, it will have a length, just like any jQuery object would if it matches that selection. So if it's been checked, we can set published on property equal to the new date. So if we write an article today, we're going to generate a new date that will be generated as today. If it's not checked, we're just going to pass it the value of null, which will then turn into essentially draft mode for us, based on the value that we assign to our published on property. So this is another use of the ternary operator. So if the first value, or if the first expression evaluates to true, then we'll assign the value immediately to the right of the question mark and before the colon. If it evaluates to false, then we're going to assign the value to the right of the colon into this property, in this case. Any questions on this part right here? It's a very concise line to be able to eliminate an if statement. But you can think of it like an if statement. But the main difference is that we're actually returning a value in this case. Okay, so this completes the form article for our new article here. The next to-do says use our own interface to the handlebars template to put this new article into the DOM. So we have the new form article, but now we need to actually now we actually want to append to that. So that's going to look very familiar. We know that we want to append to the preview section, so we can pick up on that. And since form article was created out of the article constructor, we have access to that toHTML method that's on the article prototype. So we can call toHTML on form article, and we can use our pre-existing template to grab that and generate the content that we just filled out and append that to the preview section. So we've filled out our form, we're ready to publish, and each time we update the form, it's going to update the preview.
You can actually test this now if you open up new.html.
It's in a semi-working state right now, exactly. Yeah. Any questions so far? So we're almost there. The next to-do says highlight any of the code blocks. We want to activate the highlighting of that. Before we step into that code, let's pull up the documentation. So here's highlight.js, syntax highlighting for the web, 155 languages and 73 styles. Automatic language detection, multi-language code highlighting, available for Node.js, works with any markup, compatible with any JS framework. Pretty powerful. And that's quite the claim right here, 155 languages. And they're on version 9.4.0 right now, so you can guess it's probably pretty well supported. If we click here on usage, and this is on highlightjs.org, we see the Getting Started page. It says the bare minimum for using highlight.js on a web page is linking to the library along with one of the styles and calling init highlight on load. So they've incorporated an actual style sheet here. And in our case, in our vendor folder, we actually have a style sheet already ready to go. And the class name that this style sheet has assigned to anything that's being highlighted is with this HLJS, shorthand for highlight.js. And we're going to see exactly what that looks like when we render everything. So this will find and highlight code inside of any pre or code tags. And a pre tag you might see in Markdown is just a single backtick. If you've seen any highlighting that occurs in Slack when I message in the channel, if you see anything that has different formatting, I'm using 3 backticks to generate actual code blocks. And we're going to do that in our text area form when we're filling this out to not only format it but also give it proper highlighting. Oh, is it not cooperating right now? All right, we'll take note of that. If we scroll down, we see a custom initialization section that says when you need a bit more control over highlight.js, you can use the highlight block and configure functions. This allows you to control what to highlight and when. And so this is what we're going to actually be picking up on here. So we're going to incorporate this part in that says any pre or code blocks with jQuery, we're going to run through each of them. And with the 2 parameters, I and block, we're going to call the actual highlight block method on highlight.js. So this will find anything that we use with a backtick. It'll loop through it, highlight it for us, and make it look really, really neat and stand out. So if you've ever been on an actual website where you might see a scroll, like a scroll box from left to right where it has actual sample code, that's essentially what we're going to be doing right here. So let's go back into Atom, and we will go back to articleview.js. And here's kind of an example right here. We see 3 backticks. We see some JavaScript. We see a sample function with a return statement, and we close the function out, and then we close our 3 backticks out right here. So we're going to follow the example that highlight.js provided for us. So any pre or code tags for each of those, accept a function that will get the index and element, note the capital B in block, at least on the method call. And that completes our highlighted portion right here. Don't get too caught up in the function that we're passing in, because this is somewhat internal for what the highlight library is actually doing for us. But this is a really good use case in reading the documentation and knowing exactly what to do, because if we hadn't known about this, we wouldn't have been able to write it. But with the actual highlight.js library docs, we can actually go there and see a working use case. Okay, we're almost there. The last to-do says export the new article as JSON so it's ready to copy paste into our actual blog articles.js, so our actual source data. So if we recall that export field that we initially set to be hidden, we can now fade that in. And if we remember that simply calling or invoking val is a getter, we can now change it into a setter. And the value that we want to set will be the result of calling the stringify method on the JSON object. And we're going to pass in the actual form article object that was generated inside of the constructor function that we filled out. Any questions here? What's going on with this comma? That's exactly right. So when we export the JSON, we're going to attach a comma to it because we're expecting other articles to come after that. So we can continue our array of objects in this case. So let's save articleview.js. And we'll save all of our other files. And if you go back into your terminal and open up Live Server, we can begin to test this out. And if you're not here at this point, that's okay. You don't have to follow along. But here's our resulting preview with our highlighting and formatting. Here's our title. Here's our byline with the author. And then it's hard to see in the very bottom right-hand corner, but there's a literal JSON object right here that we can select, and as soon as we click on it, it grabs the entire the entire JSON object, and we can actually copy that while it's selected. And if we go back into blogarticles.js, we can now just add it directly in here. And we're not going to add any other articles, so we can remove the comma, but we're literally just pasting this inside of our blogarticles.js file. Oh, the export field wasn't there. Oh, there's actually nothing there. Okay, we can take a look at that. Okay. We can take a look at that.
Go new.html and tack that on the end of the URL.
Oh yes, you do have to explicitly go to /new.html when we start up live server. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so if we go back here to our blogarticles.js, it's pretty much similar to what we see in the other body fields. Right, it was just something that we were writing kind of in our body to say, hey, here's a new function I learned, just providing it as an example. So it's not actually putting like literal code into our body, but it's just showing a sample of code in this case. So I'm going to save this after pasting it in. Let's see, I might actually do it.
I think you have to do live server inside the start.
Didn't think that would actually matter, but it might actually, depending on the resources we have here. Yeah, good catch. Thank you, Stephen. So we placed it at the bottom, but now if we go back to our home page, we now see that we have our new article here because of that sort method that we called initially when we were going through our actual data set.